I'd like to extend a welcome to those of you who are joining us today who weren't with us yesterday. It's great to see some new faces and some familiar faces, so welcome everyone. Just a reminder of what we're hoping to achieve today. We're having a conversation about cruising boats, blue water cruising boats of shapes, different shapes and sizes. We're hoping to focus your minds on what's important to you. And the object of the conversation this morning is to discuss different attributes of boats and aspects that you may or may not have thought about, and try and focus your minds on where you're going to be sailing and what might work for you. I would remind you all there is no such thing as the perfect boat. It's just the boat you currently have. Although someone did tell me the perfect boat was somebody else's boat. However, what we're hoping you'll come up with is ideas and compromises of what will work for you and the kind of sailing you want to do. We're very pleased to have a panel of experienced skippers with us this morning, and we're going to bounce questions off them. It is audience participation. Do feel free to join in and ask questions. If there's a particular issue you'd like the panel to discuss, bark or wave at me or stand up or shout or something. I may not always see you, particularly this side of the room, so you may need to call to get my attention, but please do ask questions if there's something you'd like them to talk about, and I'll keep the conversation rolling, hopefully in an interesting and entertaining direction. So that's our objective. And then afterwards, we've got a presentation about refitting for cruising and also rigs and sails, so some interesting stuff about boats and boaty things this morning. And then again, really pleased to welcome and thank all our open boat hosts and skippers that are here. We have a number of boats open for viewing in the marinas with skippers on board and also on the gantries. So do take some time to explore and talk to people particularly. That's the real benefit of the weekend, is the conversations you can have with people. I'd like to welcome Alistair from Discovery, who's joined us especially this morning, who has some interesting views and opinions on boats. So do, as I said yesterday, all these guys are experts. They know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about. So do take the opportunity of dragging useful knowledge and experience from them. They'll be glad to talk to you. Right, I'm going to hand the mic to our panel next and to do a bit more shouting. Thomas, go away. Right, that perennial question, what boat should I have? We're often asked that at boat shows. In fact, this whole weekend came about because I had so many conversations one year at the boat show about which boat should I choose. I thought, I know what we can do. Let's get everyone together in one space and have a nice conversation about it. So what I'm hoping to do today is answer that question for you. Very pleased to welcome our panel, Alan, Thomas, Nigel, Mike and Dan. We're going to drag your knowledge and experience out of you and hopefully entertain and inform our audience this morning. I'm going to kick off some questions about different shapes and sizes of boats, because we've got a wealth of experience here. Dan, what was the first offshore cruising boat you sailed on? Tell us a little bit about some of the boats you sailed on.
Well, to start off with, it was a Rival 38, which is a fairly traditional heavy build boat.
What do you mean by traditional?
Quite deep hulled, so round bilged, kind of a traditional long keel, fairly slow and steady, but kind of gets you there. And then from there moved on to all sorts of things, doing Atlantic crossings on anything from small production boats to big heavy cruising boats, and they all get you across.
Mike, I know you did your first transatlantic on a westerly storm, I think you were saying. So
Westerly Corsair.
Corsair.
Yeah. And that was our first experience of a centre cockpit. All our previous boats have been aft cockpit boats, and that was the boat that basically said to us, centre cockpit for us is the right thing. That's what we liked, and that if we did it again, then we would go for another centre cockpit. We did look for others that weren't, but we decided that was the one, and that's why we ended up with the All Progressive.
Alan, you look at all sorts of shapes and sizes of boats, but what ones have you enjoyed sailing on?
Oh, well, it depends what you're doing, because obviously I still enjoy a degree of racing, and that's an entirely different type of boat. As a preference, if I was going cruising, I think I'm still slightly in the traditional camp of a fairly, rounded bilge and a fairly moderate keel. So that would be my personal preference. But as you said from the outset, there's no ideal solution. I think the solution is dictated by your requirements, by your budget, and by the areas in which you want to sail as well, because that plays a big part in the choice of boat.
Nigel, you get paid to move boats from people around, so you must have sailed all shapes and sizes. Have you sailed what people would call a modern production boat rather than some of the traditional types that people have talked about?
Yes, when I first started doing deliveries, I ran Janos across the Turkey from the south of France, 44s, 50s, and they, modern production boats, the big advantage they have is the space. They're very voluminous, and normally they're very well equipped, and people shouldn't sort of not look at production boats and think that they can't do things with them.
Thomas, you've certainly lived in luxury of space on some of your boats. Some might call it the dark side, certainly the monohull sailors amongst us. I know you've done a lot of cat sailing. How would you describe the difference from some of the typical boats been discussed already?
Well, put it this way, I came to cats. I'm a cat convert, more or less. I race monohulls, but I live on multi-hulls because it's just so much more space. You got an even, a level, a nice platform, and you got just so much space to live. And don't forget, 90% of the time you'll be at anchor or on the marina. It's only 10% of the time that you sail.
That's a very interesting point. That a lot of the conversation we had yesterday was about crossing oceans and techniques and equipment, but it is a point that actually it's your home, isn't it? So maybe we should talk about
Absolutely.
living on a boat as your home.
Yes, and a cat is a floating home.
Well, just sticking with cats for a minute, a lot of monohull sailors, particularly if they come from a racing background, might say there's no feel, there's no pleasure. How would you describe the difference in sailing then?
It's a different approach to sailing, but a part of the feel and the rudder, anything else you can have in a cat as well, provided you don't load them down to deck level. They do point nowadays, they do reach speed, but again, a catamaran which is heavily laden will not be faster than a monohull, just more comfortable.
Nigel, you mentioned space and living on board a boat. What would you say in your experience was the minimum amount of space you'd want on a cruising boat? Because I mean, I've had conversations, you can, as we were talking earlier, you can cross the Atlantic on a 22-foot boat, but do you really want to? So where would you kind of say, and you're quite a tall chap.
Well, I'm just going to say, I have a different outlook on life, I think, to say the least. And for me, bigger is better. But then, I was trying to someone this morning, then the other side of that is, if I can find a berth that I can fit in, I can usually jam myself in there. So most berths for me are pretty good sea berths. If I can jam myself in, I'm quite comfortable. But actually, for me, it's not so much saloon space, because we tend not to spend too much time in the saloon. It's more how good the galley is, how efficient the galley is. When you because on delivery work, that's one of the things that is quite important, that you get fed regularly and fed well. So the galley space is important, and how ergonomic the galley is. And then for me, really, it's about berth space and where the berths are on the boat. Low down, forward of the mast is ideal for me, because that's quite comfortable. And the other thing about delivery work is that you do need rest. And when you're going to do long passages, anybody who's contemplating long passages, you've got to think about how you're going to rest and when you're going to rest, because it's really, really important. It's very easy to tire yourself out, so you need to sort of have spaces on the boat where you can sit down comfortably, lie down comfortably, get some sleep. And then in the cockpit as well, because you want to be up on deck watching things, looking at things, you've got to find comfortable spaces. And I would say that's a really important thing when you're looking at boats. Just look at the comfortable spaces. And even if you may have to make it up with a fender or two, you know, find a comfortable space where you can sit on that boat and be comfortable, because you're going to be on it a long time.
Dan, I know you're a guy that appreciates his bunk time. is that,
Jeremy sailed me before.
is that a factor that you'd put high on your list, or are there other things you would put on your priority list?
I'm closer to Nigel in that the time that we spend at sea, Nigel's always at sea, he's doing deliveries, we're always moving, so we spend more time at sea than we do in port. But port time's important, and it's how comfortable the boat is on deck that we take into consideration. A lot of the centre cockpit boats actually struggle quite a lot on that. Their cockpit space is sometimes a little bit small, unless you get up big enough in size. So the lounging area, the places that you can sit and chill, I think that's important. And it's not so much the size of the spaces down below, but how well they work. The galley, for example, is really important. When you're at sea, you know, you need to be safe and secure. You need to be able to get in everything. The same with the sea berths, those huge, lovely double cabins that you see here and at the boat show, those nice big island berths. Well, most of the owners we sail with, they end up in the saloon at sea because they're just untenable. So you have to look at that. Have you got somewhere else you can be at sea? Have you got lee berths? Can you make a nice comfy berth out of the sofa? It's the time at sea that does make the difference. In port, well, you get a feel for that, for how the boat is set up here. But it's where you can relax and enjoy the time that you're there.
Interesting, you're saying, so really you're looking for two kinds of boats. There's a boat to live on and a boat to sail across an ocean on, and they're not necessarily delivering the same thing in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were just living on it, I think Thomas has got the right idea. A nice big catamaran, you know, big patio on the back, all very nice, lovely stuff. For sailing, yeah, maybe something different. But saying that, we've been very impressed with the catamarans we've sailed. I've always come at it thinking that all the points that Thomas mentioned, you know, they're not renowned for pointing well. They're not renowned for much of a feel when you're sailing them, but I've always been pleasantly surprised. And on the World Ark particularly, there was a 44-foot cat, and we were a 51-foot monohull. We think we sail it fairly well. We think they didn't sail theirs very well, but they're always just behind us, you know. They're never that far away. We get to port and they're there. The only difference is in port they can host all the parties, so they need to be close.
Alan, can I just ask you about this sort of living on a boat at sea versus time in port? From your experience of talking with clients, would you say, how do they assess their priorities?
Again, it can be as simple as stature. To be honest with you, that can quite often dictate it. And you know, you know, if it's family sailing, numbers of the number of family members on board, and you know, that sort of thing, will always, you know, will play a big part in the choice of the yacht in terms of, will this work for us in the same way as a house, I guess. So in some respects, you know, will it work for us in the way it flows, in the way in terms of the accommodation when we're both underway and in port. But you mentioned, you know, the centre cockpit there. You know, that is, quite often with a lot of centre cockpit yachts, you do get a very good linear galley, which is a good sea galley. So you know, at the end of the day, I think it also, it's one of those things you've got to go around and look at what's available. And just find what fits the way you work, because I don't, and again, there's no ideal solution. Always been a little element of compromise in there, but I think it's ultimately going to be dictated by the people that are sailing the boat, really.
Mike, we were having a conversation earlier about sailing as a couple. How important do you think it is in terms of choosing a boat, that you're choosing a boat together rather than his boat?
Something I was going to say that I think sort of connects to what you're asking there as well, is that I strongly think that when you are sailing and when you're out at sea, then you've got to have confidence in the boat and you've got to feel comfortable. The actual passages shouldn't be, as far as we're concerned, an endurance race. You shouldn't be out there doing an endurance activity, if you like, as such. It's got to be comfortable. And I think that when you're at sea, you've got to turn it into a way of life. It's not just a passage from A to B, but you get into a routine where you could go for 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, 50 days if you had to, because that's the way of life that you are adopting. And you've got to have a boat, well, we wanted to have a boat that we're comfortable in doing that, so it's got to be comfortable at sea, and I think that's, for us, was the first priority, really. When you are in tropical climates, in hot climates, when you're in port, you're spending a lot of time on deck, in the cockpit, etc. You're not down below that often. But to get back to the question, more specifically, then I think you've got to have something that you're both comfortable with. I think from our perspective, it was very much, we need to feel comfortable at sea. Yes, it would be nice to have this, it would be nice to have that, as far as being in port is concerned. But I think the confidence at sea was the priority, I think, really for both of us.
Well, I've talked to some of you outside, and I'd say, as Dan said, many boats will get you to the other side, and sailing many other boats is easy. It's very much also that you like where you are. So for me, it's a lot of stomach feeling, whether I just like a boat. That helps. If you're in a boat that sails well, now that's not nice to live in, it's nothing. You have to feel, it's just stomach feeling. Feel well, and that's it.
You have to have an emotional connection.
Absolutely, yes.
Alan, people will look at a spec sheet and they'll see field configurations and ballast ratios and lots of technical information. Can you just kind of give us a quick thumbnail on how much does this matter in looking for a boat? If you'd be only looking for a heavy displacement boat because that's a traditional sailing boat, can you just kind of give us a quick overview of like the flavours, the options?
Well, if you look at modern sailors, they will. You have a scale, which I get. The last time I was in Las Palmas, there were people going across in pogos, which are arguably, they're bred for racing really as much as anything else. They're boats that will actively plane downwind. So I guess if that's one end of the scale, and you go to the other end of the scale, which is the type of boat you started sailing on, which I think was the Rival, you said. That's the other end of the scale. So I guess you've got, as an individual, decide where on that scale you want to be and just how much comfort. And I think displacement is important with comfort. Hull shape is important with comfort. And it goes back to what you're saying, getting into a lifestyle, a rhythm. Once you get it, once you're at sea, you have to adopt that lifestyle. So I think part of that is being comfortable in a boat that will passage mate comfortably. And I suppose as a rule of thumb, the further down that displacement route you go, arguably the more comfortable a boat becomes, but maybe at the cost of a little bit of speed as well. So again, that's an individual choice as to where you want to put yourself on that scale, really.
Alistair, can I just throw that question at you, because you build very comfortable boats, and some might ask, why should I have a boat that's 3 times the price of another boat? What am I getting for that? And I think it's down to this. A lot of it is how much boat you get, isn't it? Would you like to just elaborate on this? Where the comfort comes from, where the displacement comes from, if you like, what it is that's in there.
Well, a lot of it is down to where that weight is in the boat, in terms of how comfortable it makes it. So generally, the less weight you have in the ends makes a big difference to the pitching motion of the boat. And the more weight you have in the keel, as a percentage of the overall boat, which is the ballast ratio broadly, makes it more comfortable from a rolling perspective. Both of those two things will make it much happier for you as a cruising couple, because you'll be less tired, you'll be less crotchety with each other. And if you're going to start as a happy couple and end as a happy couple, finding that balance in the weight and the comfort of the boat is absolutely vital. So what we've found is that taking the weight out of the ends and putting it in the keel, variations of those two gives you the less of a jerky motion or know, a boat that's a little bit too active and just keeps going through the waves, keeps the boat flat and level, makes a huge difference.
Thank you. I know, having had conversations with some of you, we've got a few racers in the room that are looking to switch to the other side of the road and go cruising. So, Alan, what advice would you have for someone that's always been racing sailing and switching to a cruising boat and possibly is looking at a more performance-orientated boat? Are they going to have problems in other areas, or are they going to have to compromise in some way?
I think they're going to have to compromise in terms of, in terms of overall weight and displacement of the vessel. Of course they are. They need a vessel with larger capabilities than a race boat in terms of capacities, tankage, fuel tankage, water tankage, battery capacities and so on. But I don't think that necessarily means nowadays that you need to make too much of a sacrifice on the performance, because there are options out there. To name an example, something like Sweden 45 is a very capable blue water boat, but you drop things like the Skeg, which I know a lot of blue water sailors hold dear. You go to a balanced rudder, a more thin keel.
Can you just explain for the benefit of the room what those terms mean to the boat?
Well, Skeg obviously is, when you've got a Skeg hung rudder, you've got a section of effectively almost like another keel in front of the rudder, which the rudder's hung on, which gives the vessel greater directional stability, but it also, I think a lot of blue water sailors see a lot of comfort in that in terms of protection of the rudder, whereas if you have a balanced rudder or a semi-balanced rudder, it's purely on its rudder stock, which I guess sort of more down-the-road sailors would see as being a little bit more vulnerable than a Skeg hung rudder. So again, no, I think there's a boat out there for everyone in terms of the type of sailing you want to do, and it goes back to that scale of where on the displacement and hull profile scale you want to be in terms of this type of sailing you want that boat to deliver.
Nigel, I'm going to move the topics on a little bit and just ask you about your views on reefing systems. It's something that I know cruisers will do a lot. Do you have strong views based on the boats you've sailed on? Could you maybe talk about some of the different types you've sailed on?
I wouldn't say I've got strong views. My colleague Mark in the office does have strong views. For him, slab reefing is he just says, why bother doing anything else? Because with slab reefing, you can't really go wrong, and you get a nice sail shape. Whatever reef you've got in, you can normally get a decent sail shape out of it. But for ease of handling, in-mast furling is very popular, and if it's set up properly, it's usually pretty good, and you can get a decent sail shape out of it. But the beauty about it is you can reef in pretty much any conditions that you want if you've got the right equipment. So I'd say in-mast furling is there, and it's very popular. We have had some difficulties with in boom reefing, insofar as you do need to think about the boom angle with the mast to get it right. And I saw a fantastic little gizmo in Key West recently. A guy had set up a piece of bungee cord on his hydraulic vang, and he knew exactly when this piece of bungee cord was stretched to the right place with a mark on the mast, when that boom angle was correct. And it was in boom furling. He'd obviously thought about an awful lot, but he came up with a very, very simple system. So in boom furling again, popular, but you need to just get it right and be comfortable with the system. It's like everything. You've really got to sort of understand how the system works and work it out for yourself and practice it. On deliveries, we do get the opportunity to maybe look at systems in a bit more depth, because we have to fairly quickly, and then make sure we know exactly how they're going to work and exactly how they're going to perform. Our maxim to delivery crews is we don't overpress boats, we reef early, so we need to know and be confident that reefing system will work for us at the right time. And that's the key for it to us. There are lots of different systems out there, but you've got to understand the system, know how to do it, and do it early. Is sort of our sort of guidelines, really.
Yes, and make absolutely sure, whether it's the mainsail or the Genoa or the Geneca, whatever, that whatever system you have, it does work under any condition. If you go blue water sailing, there is no it might work or it might not. If it has failed twice before, it might fail a third time, and that's no option.
Dan, picking up a comment that Nigel made about if you have in-mast or in-boom furling, you get a different sail shape and therefore you're not performing. Having sailed around the world, you've got slab reefing. Did you notice a big difference in performance of boats? And if you're crossing an ocean, does it really matter from a cruiser's perspective?
No,
taking my racer's hat off and putting it down, I'm a comfortable cruising boat. Does it matter to me that I'm a little bit slower?
No, I don't think it does matter from that point of view. I don't think that downwind sailing actually make that much notice whether or not you've got a slab reef main or you've got an in-mast furling main. I'm with Nigel's colleague Mark in that I firmly believe that slab reefing is the better solution, only because if you need that solution to make your life easier when handling the sails, it means you can't handle the sails on the boat that's got the in-mast furling. If you've had to go for a bigger boat and you can only manage it because of your in-mast furling, then when something goes wrong, can you manage to fix it? That's where we come in. But on the performance side of it, no, I don't think it really makes a difference. And again, we're always embarrassed about this out on the race course. You know, there's a boat out there with in-mast furling and it's keeping up with you and you seem to think this is a real knock to your pride. But the reality is, you know, they're fine. You know, the sail shape is getting better and better. But you do have to maintain fairly new sails. That's the key thing with it. Your sails will last, in our experience, probably half the time of a conventional sail because you'll start to lose the shape. As soon as you lose the shape, it won't go away. So that's just one thing to consider. But it certainly makes life easy.
Alan, do you want to comment on the subject?
Yeah, I think, you know, certainly from a brokerage point of view, we see it in the choice that people make. I think once you go north of that sort of 40, 43, 45 feet upwards, and you're looking at running a boat maybe as a couple, you know, the most popular choice will be in mast, because they just see it as an easier way of handling the deck, especially if you're standing watch by yourself. If you've in mast, you know, you can generally reduce the mainsail area without having to call on the off-watch crew. I think there's that fear of trying to handle a slab reef sometimes as well. When you go north of 45 feet, you're talking quite a lot of canvas. And my only comment is that actually sometimes a poorly put in slab reef leaves a mainsail still quite full with no outhaul, and actually it can be as powerful. So you know, that in itself could be a problem. If you're not putting a slab reef in tightly and firmly enough, it can be as much harm as it is good. I think if we maybe touched on Elstrom there, you know, if you look at modern in-mast mains now, you're going to full vertical battens, laminate sails as well, partial vertical battens, and a lot more roach in the sail as well with the use of battens. So I don't think your performance is really that compromised.
Would you recommend though that if someone's buying a boat with in-mast furling, they should plan on renewing the mainsail before they go off Bluewater?
Oh, well, it obviously depends on the individual main at the time. But yeah, if you're heading off on a big trip and you've got a sail that's maybe 50% into its life, 2/3 of the way into its life, and you want to go off with a clear maintenance schedule ahead of you, then a new mainsail is probably on the wish list. Although I think I'm right in saying that, maybe you confirm this, the cost of replacement on an in-mast main is generally slightly less than that of a conventional batten main.
There's definitely pros and cons. Do you
Yeah,
think it
no,
comes
absolutely.
down to personal taste and preference? Or?
It does indeed, yeah. And I think everyone's heard those stories about jamming in-mast mains and so on, but actually if you go back, generally those will be based on stories from, dare I say it, charter boats perhaps that have had mainsails that are probably past their best, which is generally where the problems occur. Yeah, yeah.
We touched a little bit on steering, so I'm not going to go there again, but I would like to just again ask your view with your broker's hat on about different rig configurations. I know traditionally, if you go back 20 years, a Bluewater cruiser had to be a ketch, it had to have 2 masts. Why has that changed? Is that just because people don't build them anymore, or?
I guess the ketch is obviously something that is regarded as a little old school nowadays. Actually, one of the last boats I ran, oddly enough, was a ketch, and I found it a great rig. It's cutter-headed ketch. It's a very flexible rig, and you've got lots of combinations that you can use in varying conditions. right down to leaving the mizzen up when you're at anchor as a mizzen staysail. So it does have its uses, but there aren't as many examples of that rig around in this day and age. The default, I guess, is masthead sloop with a Genoa. Although even Genoas now are falling out of fashion, I find a little bit, and people are going to 105% Genoas as opposed to the 130s.
Do you think it is just a matter of fashion, or is it?
Well, in terms of this slightly smaller head sail, I think that is more. No, that's just a development. That's an improvement. Boats are going back to being a little bit, I think, more mainsail driven, smaller head sails. But then the compromise there is that you lose out a little bit when you go onto a reach, because you haven't got that big old powerful Genoa. But then that's where things like Code Zeros and furling Jennikers and
I might just ask Mike, how often do you do that kind of sailing when you're cruising? Do you tend to find that you're mainly downwind and using twin head sails, or how important to you is the performance of your mainsail in your general cruising sailing?
Well, I think if you looked at last house, we've got the double-headed rig, so we've actually got 3 furling gears. So we've got 2 head sails, one just behind the other, 2 furling gears, and then we've got a cutter stay, which is also a furling gear. Of all our sails, the one in the best condition is the mainsail, because we don't use it that often. We will use it when we have to use it, but going downwind, we've got the 2 poles, and we have the sails pulled down, and we find that that gives us great speed, easy to reef, and lots of different options. So that's a rig that after our first encounter on the Corsair, again, we said, I may have said yesterday, that we decided we would go for 2 poles and 2 head sails, and we're very, very pleased that we did that. We started off with a cutter stay as being just a stay that could be removed and put back when you wanted it, but in Australia we converted that to a roller reefing as well, so we had the 3 roller reefing, and it just made everything so easy to use. So, yeah.
Did you have the twin stays on the boat when you bought it, or did you retrofit them?
No, it's a standard Hallberg-Grassi. We had the rig completely redone, we talked around. There's a guy, some of you know, Mike Pocock, who had designed that type of rig. We spoke to Mike, and we spoke to the Selden about how we would have that second forestay fitted and where it should go, and no, we created it effectively. Yeah. One thing as well, just going back slightly, in terms of the displacement, I think one of the things on boats, if you're going to be away for a long time, and we lived on the boat continuously for 7 years, so is something that can actually take the weight. I mean, you accumulate a lot of stuff in 7 years. The boat goes down. We've only just moved back ashore in the last month, and we've been offloading, and the boat has definitely gone up 3 inches in the water. So you've got to have a boat that's going to be capable of being able to carry all the stuff that you're going to pick up on the way around.
That's an interesting point as well, because if you overload a boat, it becomes unstable. So you've got to be aware of the stability of your own boat when you start putting it on. Nigel, have you ever come across a situation where you thought, well, this boat's a bit heavy, I really shouldn't be sailing it?
Not heavy as such, but certainly we've come across boats that have got an accumulation of gear, and for us then arriving on a boat, crew of 3, crew of 4, we've got to live somewhere, so we've then got to create the space to live, and also create a safe environment for us. So photographs of where everything is, and then moving it to a more appropriate storage space for a delivery is sort of something that does tax us every now and again. Bicycles and deck chairs and kayaks and God knows what. So yeah, it can be a bit of an issue. But as Mike said, these are the things that people will accumulate on the boat long enough. The delivery I've just done, it was a Beneteau 57. with the owner. They had 2 kayaks. Every lazarette was full to the top with gear, barbecue, shopping trolleys, bicycles. You know, because him and his wife used the boat an awful lot, and that was all the gear that they had to use the boat how they wanted to use it.
I'm certainly getting the feeling from your answers that the ideal cruising boat is actually 2 boats, because you want the comfortable one to live on when you're in somewhere, and you want the, if you like, the ocean prep boat for when you cross an ocean. So how do you compromise on getting all those aspects together? I mean, would you advise people that certain things are more important, or how would you suggest that people start making that decision process?
Well, maybe if I can kick it off, perhaps you should downsize before you buy the boat. and go at it with not a lot.
Downsize your life.
Downsize your life first. Declutter first, then buy the boat.
Oh, where do you start? You know, it's a tricky one, because I think you've got to have a list of prerequisites in terms of what the boat, what your expectations of the boat, in terms of the people you're going to have on board, in terms of what your expectation is in terms of comfort, and then do you go aft cockpit, do you go centre cockpit? Quite often that's a very black and white choice. There are people out there that just go, no, I'm an aft cockpit person, and that's it. There's huge benefits again from both. Aft cockpit boats quite often enjoy a little bit better storage. Larger cockpit size, especially if you're sub 42 feet, 43 feet. Once you go north of that centre cockpit design, there's less in it really, because the cockpit size can be of a size where it's on a par really. I think you've got to go out and maybe based on your previous experience, or based on touring around a yard with us and talking about the pros and cons of each different style of boat, and then you can start to hone in on what you think is going to meet with your requirement. Then it's down to fine-tuning that search into meeting all the smaller, that tick list that you've established yourself. It's either again based on what you've done previously and what your preferences are, or coming to events like this and talking to people like this as well and benefiting from their experience.
Following that theme on, I'm just going to kind of move. We've touched on some of these already. Living on a boat, we've talked about cockpits, we've talked about computers crashing.
Well, as you can see, a laptop only is not an option.
We're talking about living on boats. Putting stuff on a boat, and that kind of is this difficult question about how big a boat you should have based on how much stuff you put on. Mike, were you surprised when you went from your westerly onto your Halberg? Did it feel like a significantly bigger boat?
Yes, I think it did.
Were you scared by the size of the boat? You think, what have we done? This is enormous.
The first time we took it out, we thought this is quite a lot bigger. Are we going to be able to cope with it? Because of the 2 boats were both very similar in design, then it was really, everything was in virtually the same place, but it was just bigger. In a sense, the Hallberg actually felt more compact than the Corsair in terms of the way it was put together. But yes, until we got used to it, then we did think that are we going to be able to manage this size of boat? And it's something I've heard, and something probably everybody knows, is that everybody sort of tends to say that their ideal boat is the next size up, because you can imagine being able to cope with the next size up, but 2 sizes up is too big. I think from our point of view, we would have liked to have had not a 42 but a 46, because that gave you an extra cabin that we don't have. We just got the 4-peak main saloon, and then the aft cabin, and having an extra cabin for either guests or somewhere that you can store even more stuff and shut the door would have been quite nice to have. But I'm sure if we'd had that, maybe we would have wanted one with 2 extra cabins. Who knows?
Well, I can only tell you one thing. Regardless of how big the boat is, every space there is you will fill up. That's easy. And the next thing I can tell you is, regardless of how big the boat is, it takes you 2 days and you'll use all of it. My wife, we've been on a 58-footer, easy. After 2 days we used every single room in the boat just because it was there.
The issue we haven't talked about really is the boat selection budget. So do you just buy the boat you can afford and make the most of it, or should one go down in budget to have some money left for doing things to the boat? Which hang on, there's a broken. Where would you direct people? Like there's 2 schools of thought. There's buy a turnkey boat and sail away, or there's buy a boat and do things to it. And if you're going to do things to it, how much of a percentage of your purchase price should you have in reserve to do stuff to the boat?
Well, I think that's dictated in terms of your expectation of the style of boat you're after, the size of boat you're after, the sort of age group of boat that you're after as well. So that will dictate it. Then you'll see examples of both. We can show you examples of both here, where we have 1 or 2 boats that are pretty well turnkey, ready to go. But even then, you're still going to find stuff that you want to fine-tune, you want to change, you want to add. So whether it's a new boat or a brokerage boat, you've got to be. I think you've got to be honest with yourself and go, well, there's going to be more spend on top of where I currently am. In terms of brokerage boats, there are those. They do break into a number of categories. You've got a boat that is pretty much a fait accompli and it's ready to, give it, barring maybe anti-fouling and a few bits and pieces, it's largely ready to go post-survey. There are other boats which are, they're 60% of the way there. They've been there, done it. They've been around the world and so on. And yes, they're a very good proposition, but you will need to go into a period of refit, just servicing some of the systems that are on board there. And that quite often that suits people because they like the idea of doing that, because then they get a great sense of ownership of the boat. They buy a boat that, it's, as I say, it's 60% there, but needs what we would call a bit of a pit stop. And in buying that, if you're, you need to be of a practical bent. If you're going to undertake long distance voyages and so on, you need to know your boat. So that's quite often a good opportunity to buy a boat and carry out that refit, either with a combination of maybe yourself or in conjunction with a boat yard, where you're working alongside a boat yard and you'll undertake certain tasks and they will undertake certain tasks. And in doing so, there may well be savings to be made as well. So I think a lot of that as well will be dictated by, once you start your search, you will have a finite budget, and you'll have and again back to that list of requirements. But then it'll be a question of looking at the individual boats that catch your eye or available to you, because they're all going to be in different places on that scale.
Just to add to what Alan said, it's interesting that in the delivery business that we're in, we see boats in those various stages. We see brand new boats out of the factory where people are then going to take them and then make them into their boat. So they'll add things to them, but they'll have already spec'd out the factory how they want the boat to be, and they'll add to it. We see boats that have just been repositioned because they own a shorter time. So we see boats that are how an owner wants them, and they're well maintained. They're set up to do what the owner wants to do with them, whether that's long distance cruising or just holiday cruising, wherever, in whichever part of the world that they are. We also then bring boats to people like Alan. There are several boats on the stand there that we've delivered that the owners decided to sell or to trade up or trade in. And so we see the boats that maybe are then coming back into the UK and will need work doing to them. So it's interesting from our perspective that we do see the whole spectrum of where a boat starts off and where it might end up. And that's quite interesting. particularly for our skippers, that they get to see boats in lots of different conditions. It's great.
Mike, you mentioned that you filled all the space on your boat, you put stuff on there. I've listed a few things on the screen there, dinghies and davits, for example. I know we had some comments about dinghies. Would you like to elaborate on how significant a dinghy is to a cruiser?
Yeah, I can say one thing you haven't got on there is half the rocks from New Zealand, which came back. One of our crew members got very keen on collecting rocks, and yeah. Dinghies, absolutely essential to get a good dinghy, and a dinghy that you're happy with. One that is not too big, that you can manhandle, that you can pull up a beach if you have to do that. That you can get on the boat if you're going to put it on the foredeck. Davits, we have davits on our boat, but we only use the davits for local coastal cruising. When we're at sea, the dinghy comes off and is packed away. We had a little rib to start with, which was we got it because it was an Avon rib, small, that folded down, but we could actually put it under the boom and lash it down there when we were at sea, which was great, and we liked it. It was easy to handle. We could drag it up beaches, but it was incredibly wet. So wherever you went, the smallest bit of chop was you just got soaking, and there were certainly passages. When you get somewhere, you might want to go for 1, 2, or 3 miles in the dinghy to get somewhere, and we couldn't do that very easily in that particular dinghy. So we actually got ourselves a total inflatable dinghy, a much bigger one, 3.35 I think it was, and with aluminium floorboards, and that was great for being had big tubes. Tubes are important if you can get big tubes. That was great, but the amount of effort to put it up was quite considerable, particularly trying to put it up on the foredeck. And we've managed with it. Both had the good points, both had the bad points, and we haven't got the right one yet. So we're still looking for it. But they are essential. It's like your car. Once you're cruising, the dinghy becomes an essential feature.
Tom, for people that might be heading towards the Mediterranean, do you want to just discuss passerelle? Thomas, for his...
Well, on the Med, it's very often transitive. There's very often surge in the harbour, up to waves in the harbour, so you want to be a good distance away with the boat from the jetty or the pontoon, whatever you have. And you have to have something that you could call a passerelle, whether it's just an aluminum ladder or a real passerelle, and weight becomes an issue and total size becomes an issue. Because what you want is at least 1.5 meters distance. Then you have about 40 centimeters on the boat. You have to have 40 centimeters on the shore. So that is at least 2 meters, 2.5 meters you want to have your passerelle being long. You won't be able to stow that in one piece, so it has to be foldable somehow. Just think about it. There are many ways to do one, but it has to be stowed somewhere.
Would you need one if you were just going to the Caribbean?
No, for the Caribbean, no. Caribbean, it's either you're in the marina. St. Lucia is a nice marina like we have over here, and then you're anchoring, and that's it. Anchoring, anchor gear is essential. Good anchor gear.
Touched on that yesterday. Dan, have you got any views on anchor windlasses?
I know a lot about anchor windlasses at the moment. Ours failed in the Pacific and caused the crew quite a lot of grief, pulling it all up by hand. So make sure you've...
Is the crew your wife, mate?
Well, happily, she was doing the directing from the back. I was pretending at the front. And then the 6 clients behind me were actually the ones doing the work. But I was motivating them, I think, at times. Yeah. But yeah, it is very important.
It's an awkward place to have a failure like that, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. We had to... It was very difficult to get a replacement where we were and then get everything that needed to be done. We're an old boat, so the windlass that was on the boat, you can't just phone up and order a new one. So you get the new windlass, but then you also have to do the deck work and everything that goes with it. and we had to fly it out with my sister, so she wasn't massively pleased. They're quite heavy anchor windlasses. But anyway, she was coming for a sail, so that's that. But yeah, having something that's obviously suitable, but most boats that you're going to be buying will come with an anchor windlass on. It's unlikely that unless it failed that you'd want to really change or upgrade it, because they're quite a significant cost. But if you are choosing one, having one that will accept both the chain and also that you can put rope on the top of, so if you're med style, you can get a good amount of tension on your lazy lines. For us on Skylark, it's the only powered winch on the boat. We don't have any other powered winches, so we use it for going up the mast as well. We tail a halyard back to the windlass, which means that I can go up without without me getting sweaty, pulling myself, and people having to wind me. So that's a consideration.
Yeah, just one thing there. In terms of going up the mast, we put mast steps. We had mast steps on the Corsair, which we put on, and we put mast steps on this one, and we found that absolutely invaluable. I used to go up before any long trip to actually check the rigging and check everything was okay. And if we had any issues, it made getting up there very, very much easier. So I would certainly consider doing that.
Yeah, I certainly have some way of getting up, however that is, and it's more important not at the beginning of your long passage, but we make sure that we've done it as soon as we arrive, particularly if you're on a tight schedule, if you're doing a rally, you know, you haven't got time to get stuff sent out very often, so you don't want to find it just before you go. First thing we do, well, we have a gin and tonic, but then shortly after that, you know, well, maybe without the gin and tonic, but go up the mast and have a look and just check everything really thoroughly. So you need to be comfortable about comfortable in the first place about going up. You know, if you're doing something like the Pacific, we're going up, well, probably twice a month, just as a preventative maintenance. In the UK, obviously, you wouldn't be doing anything like that because you're not doing the miles. But you need to be happy with how you're going to go up and think about that, whether or not it's powered winches, if it's mast steps, if it's the various other things on the market that you can use. But it's
Yeah, just going back about getting ashore from what you were saying earlier. We actually used the fender board, particularly in Las Palmas, for example. We put the fender board from our bathing step onto the platform. We actually put it onto ropes, so it was just above, and we used the fender board as a means of getting ashore. So that worked quite well, and quite cheap.
Cheap is good.
Yeah, those passerelles, those carbon passerelles that fold in half, they're wonderful, and they're what, about $3.5 grand, $4 grand maybe? Yeah, they're expensive. For the Mediterranean, though, of course it's going to be invaluable. But in the Pacific and in the Caribbean, you just don't use it. And the 1 or 2 times you do, you can make something as like a fender board, or we just put the boat so far away from the dock that you have to use the dinghy to get between them. That also stops the unwelcome visitors that you might also get as well. So there are always solutions, depending on where you're going to cruise, what you need.
We are out of time now, so to wrap up, I just kind of like, is there one word of advice you want to send people away on launching them on their boat search, or don't forget about this, or what would be your top tip, or what's the favourite thing you have on your boat, or Thomas, what's the best thing you like about the Exu-sail, what's the tip you would give people to finish with?
Well, if I'm talking for cats, it's just living space outside. It's just enormous. And my top tip for you is just, as I said before, stomach feeding. Go for your stomach feeding. The boat you feel good on, that's it.
I would certainly say to people, take advantage of events like this to go and look at as many boats as you can. And just think about things really carefully, and always think about things that annoy you about a boat. Because if it annoys you now, when you bought it and you're halfway across the Atlantic, it will annoy the hell out of you.
I think I'd probably reinforce that in saying, utilise today's opportunity as much as possible. You've got lots of experienced skippers on their boats here this weekend, all of whom have been there, done it, and so go and talk to them. But also utilise the fact that we've got a very, very varied selection of boats here: aft cockpit, centre cockpit, heavy displacement, lighter displacement. So come and pick my brains, pick my colleagues' brains. Please, we're here. That's what we're here for. And just hopefully go away with as much as you can on the weekend.
I think it really is just about seeing as many boats as you can. When we were looking, we had a really, really accurate shortlist about what we wanted. You know, it was absolute what we needed out of that boat. And we still spent two weeks driving around America looking at boats. And at that point, you can really look, you can choose, and you can make an informed decision. The other thing I would say is if you're looking at second-hand boats, the spec of the boat is important. The person that paid to put that generator in, the water maker, everything that went on that boat, that cost them a lot of money. But the reality is when that boat's being sold, you're getting that for not much more money than the boat that hasn't got it. So I'd look at specs on the older boats particularly.
Any last words to send people away with?
Yeah, just a couple. I think, you know, echoing everything that's been said about looking around at the boat, but if you're going together, then go and look at boats together. Make certain that you're both happy with it, that you've both looked at the good points, the bad points, and discuss it, and make certain that you are both happy with what you're going to get. And the final thing is that someone else once said that if you're rowing away from your boat looking back, it has to look lovely. And if it doesn't look lovely, it's the wrong boat.
Thank you, guys.